Jace the Mind Sculptor, a 3 loyalty Planeswalker card for 4 mana. It can fix the top card of libraries by adding 2 loyalty counters, draw 3 cards but place 2 on the top of your library for no loyalty counters whatsoever, bounce a creature in exchange for 1 loyalty counter, and essentially win you the game by removing your opponent's entire library. By all accounts, this Planeswalker stands out as a blue player's dream. It has a reputation in the community as a rather pricey card, but is that price tag warranted? How good was Jace the Mind Sculptor really? To understand how good Jace the Mind Sculptor was as a card, you need to first understand all of its abilities and how well they worked together to make this an extremely effective Planeswalker. You can describe how good the Planeswalker abilities are by equating them to cards they most resemble in functionality, and simply asking the question, was that card good or did it see play? Let's start with Jace's 0 loyalty ability. Draw 3 cards, then put 2 from your hand on top of your library in any order. This is a functional free brainstorm. It's a common for 1 mana that's been reprinted about 18 times, including appearances in Masters and Commander sets. It's a clearly potent card to gain advantage over your opponent in hand size and quality, and you get endless brainstorms for free with Jace at no expense to your deck size. The same is true for its -1 ability. Bounce spells in MTG have come in all shapes, sizes, and quality over the years. Jace keeps it simple, being just a standard bounce of an opponent's creature back to their hand. While certainly less flashy than some of its other abilities, this bounce component is what makes Jace the Mind Sculptor such an amazingly difficult card to deal with. Coming in with 3 loyalty counters, losing 1 is a small price to pay to remove a threat to Jace from the board. Planeswalkers with abilities that protect themselves are always prized, and it really adds to Jace the Mind Sculptor's strengths. The card's first and last abilities don't really have a strong one-to-one comparison to other cards, but that doesn't mean we can't draw conclusions to their efficacy. Its +2 ability is amazing because of its flexibility. Note, it says that you can look at the top of target player's library and not just your own. Yes, you can scry your own library and fix your next draw a little, but more impressively, you can essentially lock your opponent into a cycle of bad draws. If you have the spells you need, just hit your opponent with this and increase the likelihood of them mana flooding or mana droughting.
The goggles do nothing.
This dreaded scenario that's frustrated all of us as players was now available on tap from a card. And finally, the ultimate. When we ask, is that Planeswalker's ultimate a win condition, we essentially compare it to Jace the Mind Sculptor. If you do somehow get this off, as difficult as that may be, you will win the game. Your opponent loses not only their library, but their remaining hand as well, starting at 0, and just drawing what used to be their hand for what little time they have left in the game. Looking back though, how did all these abilities translate to performance at a competitive level? Introduced in World Wake to the standard format on February 5th, 2010, Jace the Mind Sculptor initially had a colder reception than one you'd imagine for such a prolific card. Its first few months on the competitive scene, players eased it into traditional control decks such as blue-white tap-out. In this deck, the players quite literally controlled their opponents into submission, and even still, Jace the Mind Sculptor only saw a few includes. The card played its role of controlling the opponent's draw step and helping players like Robert Jerkovich fix their ways to undefeated showings at Grand Prix. But this was merely the beginning. As players began figuring out Jace the Mind Sculptor, its prevalence soon reached a fevered pitch. Brian Kibler was one of the first to utilize this Planeswalker in what was dubbed the next level Bant deck. At Grand Prix Sendai in 2010 with 907 other players, Brian managed to snag the top spot in the tournament with this deck, including 3 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor, along with other supporting Planeswalker cards. This wasn't the only deck at this tournament running Jace though. Planeswalker decks and elements of control decks riddled the scene, with this card being included in the second place deck as well as placing throughout the event's top 8. This Grand Prix was the first major indicator that Jace the Mind Sculptor was on its way to becoming a format-defining card. And tournament after tournament, that proved true.
Again and again, and again and again and again.
In early 2011, a new type of deck running Jace the Mind Sculptor started to pick up steam, commonly referred to as Callblade, which utilized playsets of Squadron Hawk and Stoneforge Mystic, along with equipment like Swords of Feast and Famine. By this point, the player base had caught on that Jace the Mind Sculptor was almost an auto-include as a playset for any deck with blue mana. Even in a deck all about giving a bird a sword, Jace was just too valuable at controlling your opponent and getting you the tools you needed to win. The Planeswalker just does everything. The goal was just to control your opponent until your birds could swing in freely, and Jace was amazing at it. 2011 was the year of the Callblade, seeing numerous top 8 showings in almost every major event that took place. Jace expanded its influence to other control decks that showed as well, but the Callblade decks are where it truly shined. During Star City Games Open in Washington, D.C., some variant of the Callblade deck hit 4 of the top 8 decks at the tournament, including the winning deck piloted by Gary Thompson. The same was true at Grand Prix Dallas, with 4 of the top 8 decks, including Jace the Mind Sculptor in these Callblade decks. With its notoriety growing and all the best decks supporting it, Jace the Mind Sculptor skyrocketed in value and price. It was seen as a must-have card, and its price tag reflected that sentiment. Sellers were asking upwards of $80 for a near-mint copy of the Planeswalker, a staggering price for a standard format card. This Planeswalker card went on to define the standard format it was included in. From February 2010 to the day it finally rotated out, September 29th, 2011, Jace the Mind Sculptor quite literally sculpted competitive play in Magic the Gathering.
Move this man!
From Callblade to Rug Control to even Twin Blade decks at the tail end of its life, Jace was a pivotal component to nearly every top 8 competitive deck. When its rotation came, players were only more excited to see how the Planeswalker could shake up the Eternal formats, while other players shuddered at the thought of its price only continuing to rise. While Jace the Mind Sculptor was unbelievably powerful in Standard, even to the point that Wizards employees discussed its potential ban, the card would have been undeniably broken in an Eternal format like Modern. Since the format's inception, Jace the Mind Sculptor has been banned. Fears of an Eternal format defining card threatening to stagnate the diversity of decks at a competitive level left officials with no other choice than to exclude Jace the Mind Sculptor until such a time where its heavy control abilities would be reined in by newer cards entering the pool. With time, that's exactly what happened, as the Modern scene started to shift from heavy control to favoring speed and aggression. Citing results from Pro Tour rivals of Ixalan, Wizards of the Coast noted that spells that cost 4 mana that didn't threaten to win the game outright just weren't being played in the top 8 decks of the Modern format. Modern had shifted to a faster format that naturally didn't bode well for control decks or cards like Jace the Mind Sculptor. Believing that Modern finally had the tools and environment to deal with such a powerful Planeswalker, Jace the Mind Sculptor was officially unbanned in Modern on February 12, 2018. Initially, it appeared that Wizards of the Coast was correct. The format was just too fast to cater to control players looking to run the now free Jace. It showed up in a few top 8 decks, but not nearly hitting the levels of performance it had in Standard, never reaching that top spot in any of the standout competitive tournaments in early 2018 after its unbanning. It did, however, get to number 2 in a Grixis control deck piloted by Aiden Frisch during the Grand Prix Sydney event, though it was still clearly a step down from where the card had once been. While still making appearances in top 8 decks across Modern, Jace would again finally see the top spot in a gift control deck played by Nicholas Kroll at the MKM Series 2018 event. It also found a more prominent home in blue-white control decks played in Modern, getting the top spot in the MTGO Modern PTQ in 2019. Jeskai and blue-white control decks are the most common to run Jace the Mind Sculptor, with such decks being 4 of the top 8 at Grand Prix Detroit in 2018, the top spot being taken by Andrew Lopez. Jace the Mind Sculptor Jeskai Control would again be number 1 at the SCG Classic in Baltimore, played by Kazu Negri. The data Wizards of the Coast collected regarding the Modern format during Jace the Mind Sculptor's banning proved invaluable. They correctly predicted its initial strength in the format and banned it appropriately, and again realized that the format had the answers with new cards in 2018 leading to its unbanning. While Jace the Mind Sculptor still is a powerful card, even in the modern format, it isn't as pervasive as it had been during its standard lifetime. One could argue that Jace should have been banned in standard all those years ago. But today, no one's standing outside Wizards HQ protesting its include in modern.
What do you want?
Prize dog!
When do you want it?
Prize dog!
Yay!
It was, and probably is, the most powerful Planeswalker ever printed in terms of its efficacy. It just does more for less than any other Planeswalker card in the history of MTG. Some cards are just too good for a standard format, and it's a lesson I believe Wizards had learned regarding Jace's performance in that format. Jace the Mind Sculptor, like Icarus, flew too close to the sun. Its quick rise in 2011 was met with a ban that hindered its growth in Eternal format, leading to its downfall. Though no longer seen as the format-defining card it once was, it still stands as the most powerful Planeswalker card of all time. Which means that, yes, it was really good.